a London-based trade paper for the worldwide film business, but with an international viewpoint, really. I'd like to welcome you here today to this illustrious panel in which we're going to be discussing the possible cooperation between the US industry and the Russian industry, and the opportunities and challenges that entails. It's a very exciting time for Russia, obviously. It's packed with talent, it's packed with great stories and material. The question is, how can those stories be seen, not just in Russia, but in the rest of the world? And we'll be talking to people who specialize in working within the Hollywood system and the independent system in the US, which get their films and their stories told in the rest of the world. So it'll be a nice way of finding out from first-hand experience how those films, stories, and talent get to travel. And by talent, that's a Hollywood word, really, meaning actors, directors, and writers. I'm going to introduce you to the panel from my far right, and I'm going to tell you what they do and why they're on the panel, and then they can tell you specifically what they do. So we'll start with Дэвид Унгер. David is a talent agent in Los Angeles who really has an incredible talent list. He can tell you more about the individual names, but he's got a nice line in working with talent outside of the US, international talent, bringing them not just into their own films in their own countries, but into international films and American films. David.
Thank you. You know, for me, this is a very exciting time for Russia, and I'm so delighted to be here because it is really symbolic of what is happening in cinema today. One of the things that I do is I work very closely with international artists. Some of my clients include actors like Gong Li, the Chinese actress who was in Memoirs of a Geisha and Miami Vice, or Anil Kapoor, the Indian actor who was in Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol, or Slumdog Millionaire. And those actors come from these wonderful cinematic cultures in China and India. And one of the things I'm interested in discussing is how Russia has not yet cultivated a Western star, because it's interesting how India and China have, but now we're in a moment where we can see the emergence of a Russian star, which would be very exciting to see.
Yep. Fantastic, thank you. Obviously we'll come back to you, David. Elena Baranova? Muravina, I'm so sorry. So many Elenas here. Muravina is also Los Angeles based. In fact, most people here are Los Angeles based, apart from Pierre and I. Elena is a legal specialist. She's obviously of Russian origin, but lives in America and specializes in working between the two cultures on a legal basis. Elena.
Shall I speak English or Russian?
It's up to you.
Я буду говорить по-русски, да? Меня зовут Елена Муравина, я адвокат. Я занимаюсь вопросами кино, телевидения и авторскими правами, или как не очень красиво по-русски, индустрии развлечений. Роль адвоката в Соединенных Штатах, работающего в области кино и авторских прав, сильно отличается от роли адвоката в России или даже в Европе, потому что адвокаты в Соединенных Штатах очень агрессивно и интенсивно представляют интересы своих клиентов. И в моей практике я представляю интересы как российских клиентов, которые хотят работать в Соединенных Штатах, так и сотрудников и участников киноиндустрии в Соединенных Штатах, которые хотят работать в России. И помогаю им найти общий язык, потому что и речь идет не только об общем языке, в смысле русского или английского языка, а найти общий язык в области индустрии, потому что не все понятия, не все привычки и не все стратегии работы в кино совпадают между Россией и Соединенными Штатами. Спасибо.
Thank you, Elena. Next, we have a veteran and highly experienced producer who has made some of the most successful and international films of the last 20 years, Paula Wagner. Paula's most famous for the Mission Impossible trilogy, I should think. Not the Mission Possible trilogy, as one of the brochures has. But it was a Mission Impossible, and she achieved it, which sort of laid the ground for a Hollywood type of film that was shot all over the world, and she's had some fantastic experiences with heads of state and prime ministers all over the world. Paula.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak English. I've made more movies internationally than I have in the United States. And I've made films in approximately 8 different countries with crew bases and actors from all over the world. When I began as a producer in 1993, and we started working on the Mission Impossible film series, the goal was to make it international. And I think that the thing that the international film market has now going for it is that is what the film business is. That is the past, present, and future. And I think that Russia, whose film origin started in 1896, when the Lumiere brothers brought film here, and you have a phenomenal tradition in film, and it's time to bring the tradition that the Russian cinema has to the rest of the world. And I think merge this in the way that can be done with the U.S. Films that are being made, and really films all over the world. So I think that's why I'm very excited and interested to be here today to discuss, and I'm very interested in that production realities, how this can be. How can we make more co-productions, and how do the expertise that, say, I bring as a producer work and blend with the available resources that you would have in this country. So I look forward to discussing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, another veteran in the world of financing and packaging films, Hal Sadoff. Hal specializes in the independent sphere, really. I mean, Paula comes from a studio system in Hollywood, and Hal has been running around the world for the last 20 years, drumming up money and putting films together. So, Hal.
Thanks, Mike. I'm also extremely excited to be here. You know, I started my career in a different way as a banker to the film industry. For many years, for almost 15 years, did film financing for a bank and financed, hundreds of films during that time. And then started really executive producing and had my own film finance company, and then worked at a talent agency with David for the last 8 years, which I left recently. And really, I focused my career on finding financiers, helping financiers package the movies, finance the movies, and structure them in a proper way so they have a real chance of getting their money back. And I think that's the most important thing in the film industry for an investor. I think I've worked on films that have shot in over 25 countries around the world, and it's truly a global business where we look at a film and we just try to decide where is the best place to shoot it in the world. Money comes from all over the world. We sell it in all countries around the world, so it's a truly global business, and we have to look at global stories to really tell these stories and try and recoup the money from different places.
Fantastic, thank you. Last, certainly not least, Pierre Spengler, another veteran producer. Unlike Paula, who's always had her base in Los Angeles, Pierre is a man of the world, lives in London now. Used to live in Paris?
No, yeah, I used to, yes.
And speaks Russian, by the way, so he could speak in Russian. Famous for the 3 and 4 Musketeers in the 70s and the Superman trilogy with Christopher Reeve. In recent years, he's become more of a European production specialist, so his films have been these complex co-productions, and he's made films with Russia, by the way, so he's going to bring some real insight, I think, today in putting together these independent films. Pierre?
Well, I think one of the interesting things to say is that we were talking here on this panel about the co-production between Russia and the United States. The United States, and no offense meant for present U.S. citizens, is is a perception in the sense that, for example, the Superman movies were British films, yet they were completely made for the American market, with the American market in mind, and with American participants, with American talent, but nevertheless, there was a European base. And I think it is important to bear that in mind in the sense of, certainly for the English-speaking world, that what we call American cinema should include a lot of the other English-speaking countries. I mean, some of the American quote-unquote stars like Russell Crowe, like they're Australian, Mel Gibson, and yet they are considered American stars. So I think the co-production between U.S. and Russia should be broadened.
Well, why don't we start by talking about that very issue, the issue of talent. As you said, and as we talked about, Paula, Hollywood historically, from the very beginning, has hoovered up talent and stories from around the world and then repackaged it as its own. David, looking at Russia today, what do you think needs to happen for Russian actors and stories to get to a global stage? Why hasn't Hollywood been knocking at Russia's door particularly?
What's interesting to me about Russian cinema is it's such a long, illustrious history. When you think about going to Eisenstein and the incredible impact that Russian cinema has had, but one of the things that's been interesting to me is that Russian films are generally made for Russian people. And it would be very interesting to see that The Artist, for me, is the greatest case study. The Artist, the movie that won the Academy Award this year, was a French movie, but it had universal appeal. It was an amazingly international story. We all related to it. These are French actors playing American roles. And yes, granted, it was a silent film, but we all saw this movie and thought of it as our movie. I would love to see a Russian film do the same thing. I would love to see a Russian film win an Academy Award. I think that is possible. I think Russia has the ability, the history, the knowledge, this incredible culture to bring to the rest of the world that can essentially translate internationally. And one of the things that's also very interesting to me is that it now has the economic throw weight to do such a thing. We're living in a day now where Russia is the 5th largest territory for movies. That is a new phenomenon. That is an incredibly vibrant thing. It is exciting for us coming from Hollywood here to acknowledge and respect the power that Russia has now. We're working with distributors now who are ready to distribute greater movies in Russia. So those distributors have the responsibility to make movies for a larger canvas. People like Alexander Rodnyansky, who is financing Western films, who is essentially a Russian distributor. He's a 4th-generation filmmaker, but he's a Russian distributor. These are the kinds of people that I'm very excited to see make Russian movies for a global audience.
Tell us about your new Russian client.
I just recently signed Natalia Vodyanova, the model. And the reason I pursued her, and I think it's exciting, because Natalia, to me, is the symbol of the future of Russia. She's this incredibly elegant, incredibly talented, incredibly beautiful woman who has this incredible passion for philanthropy. And it is a symbol of what Russia should be to the rest of the world. And I'm very proud to represent her. I'm excited to do great things with her. It's a new relationship, so we'll see how it all progresses. But she is, to me, a great symbol of what Russia is.
But it's the idea that you'll put her in English-speaking films.
She'll make films, she'll make television projects, she'll be a great ambassador to Russian culture, and frankly, to the media businesses at large.
What are the benefits when foreign actors get into Hollywood films? Do you think there's a kickback benefit for their own territory?
Absolutely. It's funny. Anil Kapoor was one of the stars of Slumdog Millionaire. He was then cast in Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol. And what was interesting is that I believe that not only is he a good actor, but I think that the studio and the producers and the filmmaker and the star, Tom Cruise, acknowledged that India played such an important place in world cinema. And to such an extent that Tom Cruise went to visit India with Anil to promote the movie. He also came to Moscow. But it was interesting to see a big movie star go and travel to these territories with other important actors from those territories in support of their movies. And I think that's a new phenomenon. I think we're seeing the globalization of cinema, where it's not just having a premiere in the Western territories, it's about having premieres globally and acknowledging the artists and the audiences abroad.
Paula, when you were casting your films, did you look to cast foreign actors with a view to sort of appealing in their markets?
Actually, yes, and that tradition, which I think Tom Cruise has really been very much in the forefront of that tradition of going and promoting movies internationally, designing the Mission Impossible from the beginning, the Mission Impossible 1. The idea was to have a team, have a lead guy, stick with the theme song, make it international, have international actors, and take it out around the world. And we accomplished that. We had Jean Reno, Emmanuel Bayart, we had German actors, we had British actors, and we had them from really all over. And then went out and promoted the film with them and went into the territories where they were, like France or what have you. I think the thing that's so exciting about now is film language is a language that is spoken all over the world. It is an international language. It transcends borders, boundaries. It transcends politics. Economics is crucial to the base and the foundation of having a good business plan to support a film. I want to address something that has to do with the international casting, et cetera, which is how does a country like Russia or a place like Moscow become a film center? How do you become a go-to place for film production? And there are a couple of considerations. First of all, is that a tax incentive, some kind of financial incentive is important. And in researching this a bit, I see the only thing you really have is the VAT tax. I think it's just the standard, you get some kind of a minor discount. But that's where obviously the government steps in and works with the film community. That's number one, so that there's financial and economic incentive. The second thing is to have a strong crew base, and that comes from, if you have it, you promote it. If you don't, you grow it and you build it. And if you bring in international production, you can work one-on-one, which is what we've done going all over the world, so that you would have a crew member from the U.S. working alongside a crew member from South Africa, or where I've shot films, or Italy, or Germany, China, etc. The third thing I think to look at is language, and cinema's language is visual. If you look at The Artist, one of the things about it that translated is because it was a visual. You didn't have to deal with the subtleties and the nuance of language. But as we are becoming more one world, language barriers seem to be dropping, as do the socio-economic barriers. But as we get past language, culture, the economics, the crew base, the actor base, is having a pool of actors available. I think those are all the things that have to be worked on and strengthened. And it all goes back to the ability to cast from this region. I would like to see more Russian actors in American films. And I certainly, in any film that I would make a real effort to bring them in. And no, not just as the villains or the bad guys or bad girls, but as real substantial members of a cast.
Let's just go back to the tax incentive issue. You said you've shot films all over the world, not necessarily China for China or France for France. You've shot Los Angeles in South Africa, for example.
Right.
So what does that actually mean? What are the decisions you're making when you decide to shoot somewhere?
As I had mentioned, the first thing is you look for authenticity. For example, Mission Impossible 2, we shot Spain in Australia, and there were incentives there. There was a certain amount of rebate based on everything that you bring into the country, and you had to use a certain amount of crew base. Australia did have a strong crew base, but we had to work within their union rules. We had to understand all of the dynamics. We could only bring a certain number of crew in. But we shot in New Zealand, and all of the countries, particularly South Africa, where we shot 1930s Los Angeles in a football field in Cape Town. And there was a substantial financial benefit to that. So we looked at that, number one, and would budget LA and then budgeted South Africa. And we came out ahead shooting it in South Africa, so that becomes a primary concern. The second is a crew base. We used Caleb Deschanel, who was a DP in this particular, brought one crew member in and used the rest South Africa crew. So that becomes another. The availability of locations, the availability of creating an infrastructure so that you can actually have your post-production houses, you can have visual effects houses. I know you have this in Canada also, that you can in UK, where you, really all over, where you can do visual effects at a more reasonable rate than, say, doing them in the States. And by the way, the States aren't happy about losing production, but sometimes it makes more sense to capture the authenticity of it. So those are the considerations. And then actor base. Can we bring in, do we have extras? Do we have actors that can play the smaller roles? It's a little more challenging in a non-English speaking country. But again, the language barriers throughout the world are beginning to dissolve somewhat.
Hal, do you think you could talk to what benefits a country? So, for example, the UK has benefited enormously by the spend of these Hollywood films in the UK. I mean, for Russia, for example, you're talking about possibly hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on Russian soil.
Yes, Paul is 100% correct. When we look at budgets, when we look at a film, we literally, and I think we mentioned this yesterday, have several different budgets done for different places in the United States and different countries around the world. And all of these states and countries are really trying to lure production there. And the reason they give a lot of these incentives, as Mike just said, is because it creates an economic environment where people stay in hotels, people go to restaurants, people hire people around for different services. They have taxi services and cars. It creates an economic stimulus for the region and the country. And I think that's maybe something that people here should look at. I know I also worked in South Africa extensively, and the reason the benefits there are so great is because the government came in and really stepped up their incentive programs and their rebates because they really wanted to grow the industry, and they felt that the economic impact that it had was the benefit of bringing in all of this production, and it created an industry. By bringing productions there, by luring them with this incentive, it really creates and builds the industry and the skill base in the particular location.
I think it's important to reiterate what Pierre said, that Hollywood films are actually not necessarily a product of Los Angeles County. I mean, most of the summer movies were shot overseas with all manner of foreign talent and crew.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I mean, look at those Superman movies. They were all shot in the UK, as you said.
Absolutely. I mean, on Superman 1, we did shoot a little bit in the US. On Superman 2 and Superman 3, we didn't even set foot in the US. So
It's fascinating.
Yeah, we did send, I must say, we did send a plate unit who shot a little bit of background, which we used for the flying. But other than that, we didn't set foot. We went to Canada, and then all the rest in England. But we built the streets of New York on the back lot of Pinewood. This would be completely a possibility to build the back streets of New York in Costco, if you have a good reason to come.
Yeah.
I'd like to take on what Paula was saying earlier in terms of having the availability of crews, the availability of talent. There's also a certain methodology of producing that we are used to in quote-unquote Hollywood films. For example, a few years, and it's a little story, about 25 years ago, I tried to set up an insurance company here to insure the normal risks that you insure on films. And I came onto like a brick wall where the Russian production managers and producers were saying, why do I need insurance? And I said, well, I mean, if your actor breaks a leg and you stop shooting, and they said, yes. And they just it couldn't understand. I'm sure it has progressed since, but there are certain things, like for example, completion guarantees. It's completely unknown here. And yet it is and I know Film Finances wants to set a foot here, because it is, especially when you deal with independent financing, which is also what we're talking about in terms of cooperation, is to get financing from Russia into Hollywood films. There needs to be that responsible attitude, which for the moment is not yet there, is not part of the culture. And I think this is one of the things that I think we need to explain, and that our Russian friends need to understand in terms of the methodology.
Elena, what are some of the challenges that you face when you're dealing between both sides, the Russians and the US? Do you think there's cultural and technical learning curves that both sides need?
I think that's true. Now, I will switch into Russian, but I don't want my co-panelists to be left out, so they now have the the ability to hear the translation. Я работала с клиентами в области кино как в Соединенных Штатах, так и в России, и могу поделиться из опыта этой работы наблюдениями о каких-то конкретных различиях в отношении специфических вопросов производства. Я вам дам несколько примеров, а потом попробую обобщить немножко. Я думаю, самое принципиальное различие между тем, как снимается кино в Соединенных Штатах, и мы потом отдельно поговорим о том, что такое американское кино. Здесь уже упоминалось, американский фильм – это не обязательно фильм, который снимается в Соединенных Штатах. Роль режиссеров в России, роль артиста очень высока и уважаема. Режиссер диктует, как мне кажется, в России условия работы, условия съемки фильма. Это далеко не обязательно так в фильме, снятом по американской модели. Продюсер во многом контролирует производство, и роль продюсера, как я часто говорю, это не быть любимым другом режиссера, а скорее наоборот. И говорить режиссеру: да, конечно, вот вам хочется иметь сегодня кран, и мы вам обязательно сделаем сегодня кран, но вы не можете, чтобы этот кран стоял у вас 2 недели, пока вы решите им воспользоваться. Актеры. Почти все актеры в России работают в театре, и поэтому они участвуют в съемках тогда, когда у них есть свободное время между спектаклями. Совершенно иной подход, естественно, по американской, скажем, модели, потому что, когда вы нанимаете актера на работу в фильме, он дает вам как бы исключительное время на период этой работы. А для западного продюсера очень тяжело представить себе, что он должен танцевать вокруг расписания актера между спектаклями. Если будут происходить совместные производства на территории России, наверное, российские актеры должны будут как-то пересмотреть свой взгляд на эти вещи, иначе будет очень трудно работать. Я потеряла очки, поэтому вы должны дать мне одну секундочку. Что такое американский фильм? Как уже говорили мои коллеги на этой панели, американский фильм далеко не обязательно фильм, который производится в Соединенных Штатах. Это фильм, который воспринимается аудиторией как американский фильм. А аудиторией фильм воспринимается как американский фильм, потому что в нем есть, он на английском языке, и в нем есть определенный уровень актеров, которые далеко не обязательно американцы. Поэтому, когда я разговариваю с российскими клиентами, и они говорят: мы хотим сделать американский фильм, а вы говорите о том, что вы будете снимать его в Венгрии и будете его финансировать во Франции, то я говорю, это не взаимно противоречащие понятия. Американский фильм может быть снят в любой точке мира и может быть профинансирован, как скажет вам Хал, многими способами. А то, что делает его американским, это как его воспринимает аудитория. Первое – актерский состав, конечно. Второе, об этом уже говорилось, как он сделан, как рассказана история. И, как мне кажется, в России с ее очень богатой историей кинематографа и замечательными артистами есть прекрасные истории, которые очень интересно рассказать. Но вот рассказывать их надо, грубо говоря, американским способом. И тогда, как говорил Дэвид, эти истории будут понятны мировой аудитории. Истории замечательные. Я вот пока здесь была несколько дней, мне рассказали очень много очень интересных сюжетов. Но надо суметь способ их воплотить так, чтобы этот сюжет был интересен мировой аудитории. И для этого, я думаю, на этом этапе российским продюсерам надо работать вместе с американскими продюсерами и американскими сценаристами. По поводу того, что говорил Дэвид о работе с актерским составом. Когда я была на фестивале в Каннах, вот буквально несколько недель назад, я встречалась с представителями студии «Канал», и они очень, так сказать, мы говорили о фильме, который недавно вышел по роману Джона Ла Карре. В английском прокате он назывался «Тинка Тейлор». Я не знаю, как он назывался в российском прокате. «Шпион, выйди вон». «Шпион, выйди вон». В этом фильме участвовали российские герои. И в ролях российских героев были сняты российские актеры. И производители этого фильма были ужасно горды и довольны тем, как у них это получилось. Они сказали, лучшее, что было в этом фильме, это была работа российских актеров. И они надеются, они сейчас будут делать следующий фильм. Опять сюжет позволяет привлечь к участию российских актеров, и они наряду с англоговорящими актерами надеются привлечь актеров из России. Как мне кажется, вот эта новая тенденция, которая будет набирать вес. И поэтому актерам нужно задуматься о том, кто будет им помогать разбираться в этом мире западного кино. Поэтому, если бы я была российским актером, я бы сейчас бегала за Дэвидом и его не отпускала.
Thanks, Elena. Can I just move on to talk about language a little bit? Let's be realistic. Films in the Russian language don't really play in the US. I mean, the foreign language film market is small and arguably dwindling in the United States. So, Paula, for example, would you encourage Russian filmmakers to make films in the English language?
I would, because it seems that English is probably spoken all over the world, and I would encourage that. I would also encourage the use. There's no reason you could not use characters who speak in the language of the territory, and you can translate. I think audiences are accepting subtitles if it enhances the main action. And this hasn't really been done, and I think it's probably difficult and costly, that there's no reason that you couldn't shoot in both languages, but it's probably a fantasy. I think it's probably not possible. But as films are becoming, the international language is more visual. And the artist, as David said, is really a symbol of a film that's probably played well all over the world because it communicates something that we all respond to. But it does go back to three things in any film, in any language, in any country. Story, the play's the thing. Story, story, story. You have to have a story. I don't care what language you shoot it in, where you shoot it, or how you shoot it, but it goes back to content reigns. Using content is king, content is queen, or I reverse that sometimes, but not when my husband's here, of course. But.
Tell us about the sort of classic style of Hollywood storytelling. I mean, it's the envy of the rest of the world. It's also looked down on to some extent by the rest of the world.
It's become it's the good, the bad, and the ugly Hollywood storytelling. Hollywood can take a story and mutilate it better than any place else in the world. Hollywood also can take a story and move you to tears, make you laugh, make you fearful, engage you, create suspense. The best and the worst have come out of Hollywood. And in addressing what Pierre and everybody has said, Hollywood is a state of mind. You can have Hollywood anywhere. Hollywood is a myth. And most Hollywood films, in my experience, was predominantly studio-based. Most studios now, before they will greenlight or make a movie in Hollywood, say, will this play in the international market? We're not making films just for a small audience. Now, the comedies seem to play more in a very specific culture. So that's more traditionally of the country itself. Comedies don't always translate as well. But that is the language. Hollywood, I see it as every film that has some kind of international base either begins, has a middle, or ends in Hollywood. And that's about it. Everything, Hollywood has, you rarely shoot films 100% in Hollywood. Hollywood is a sign up on a hill. And it's a symbol of the film business. But our business worldwide is changing rapidly. And the advent of digital technology, we are in a technologically explosive world, and that is where much of the creativity is in films. But I go back to story, plot, character. People identify with people, or robots who have human qualities. You can, or, you know, aliens who have human qualities, or souls, hearts, but people like stories about people. So, not to emphasize it too much, but that's what we can't forget. And when we tell our stories, we have to find a way to make them universal. As far as language is concerned, yes, I think movies probably, to have a broad base, need to be shot in English. And I think that if Russia can find stories. You have great storytellers who are Russian. I mean, I can name the classic stories. If there's a way to find and make an epic event film that has a base in the United States, but is a Russian story, is shot here, fathers and sons. The brothers Karamazov. I mean, I can name, and you've done it, Anna Karenina, which was just shot, but it wasn't shot here, was it?
I think they did a week in St. Petersburg, but it was shot in the UK. It's an English production. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let's talk about filmmakers for a second, David, and how, in the UK, for example, if a young filmmaker makes a even remotely commercial film, Hollywood comes knocking. Do you think we've seen Timur Bekmambetov score enormous success in the US? Do you think Russian filmmakers have that shot?
Timur is a great example of that. I mean, the Hollywood community was dazzled with his filmmaking. We all are hoping to do more of that and continue that process. I'm not familiar enough with the infrastructure that's already existing in Russia as to how these filmmakers are nurtured within the educational system of Russia, but I think it'd be wonderful to continue to promote that and create more dialogue between
We do have an education panel later on this afternoon.
Oh, I'd love to see that. I think the idea of creating more dialogue between the Russian film schools and the other film schools would create great stimulation for that. But one of the things that I'm interested in It's also appreciating the Russian market. We're living in a moment where the Russian market is now exceeding $1 billion in box office. That's a gigantic market. Where Transformers 3 opened to $22 million its opening weekend in Russia alone. A $22 million opening weekend in the U.S. is a great weekend. That's a statement. And so if we can find Russian filmmakers to make that kind of impact in Russia, I promise you the rest of the world will notice.
And I think the other phenomenon that's happening is that the studios are accepting international directors and first and second time directors more than ever before. I think you'll see a lot of the big blockbusters in Hollywood, a lot of the studio films being made by first and second time directors from international areas, commercial directors, video directors. So I think it's a very interesting time, whereas 15, 20 years ago that would never happen in Hollywood.
Why is that? Is that because they're easier to control now?
I think it's a control issue and it's a cost issue also that's driving it to a certain extent. But I think also it's the creativity. They want to get new blood and new ideas and reach the younger community. I think it's all of those things.
I think it's interesting with Timur, for example, because his films Night Watch and Day Watch were bought by Fox Searchlight, and they tried a US release on these films, but they just didn't work. But what did work was putting him directing Wanted with Angelina Jolie and James McAvoy, and he had a huge box office success.
Yeah, I just wanted to rebound on what Hal was saying in terms of first and second time directors. And there is also a thing, which is that in the Anglo-Saxon world, and this Jelena was saying earlier, the producer is the boss, and therefore, indeed, contractually, you can still, as a producer, control the film. In Russia, and in many other countries, actually, most of the non-Anglo-Saxon countries, the director is the boss, which makes a very big difference in terms of the working relationship. And I'm not saying that the producer has to be the dictator, at least I won't say it publicly, but there has to be also some compromise there in terms of the talent, of the involvement of the talent. Yeah.
A sort of the auteur culture. You think that's?
It's a difficult one in the Anglo-Saxon, in the Hollywood cinema. You have auteurs, of course, in the Hollywood cinema, but it's yeah, sure. So
I want to say one thing to Pierre. Every director thinks they're the boss, everywhere.
And what's your job, Paula, as the producer?
It's an uncomfortable but necessary alliance, the partnership between a producer and a director. And it's the only job, being a producer, that I know that hires their boss, oftentimes. And that's really, it's not just in Anglo-Saxon, it's everywhere. And it's certainly, and that's kind of the balance. And I think one of the jobs of a producer is to protect the director's vision and help the director fulfill their vision and be the go-between between the financing and the creative. So you have to be right brain, left brain as a producer. And you almost have to be able to direct yourself. Now, I don't mean direct yourself, but direct, understand the role of the director, and sometimes save the director from the financing, save them from the talent, and save them from themselves sometimes, because it's easy to become tunnel vision. So that's the producer-director relationship everywhere.
What about your relationship? I mean, just to talk a bit about your long-standing relationship with Tom Cruise as his producing partner. I mean, Tom Cruise is probably the world's most famous film star. And how do you manage the relationships between the producer, yourself, Tom, the actor, the studio, and the director?
Well, it's
juggling act.
Challenging to manage everything, but Tom was a producing partner as well. Yeah. He wasn't solely the actor. And terrific producer as well as actor. And so we were a team working with the studio, but managing the studio is really a challenge. Managing directors, a lot of actors who produce, which is a very honorable thing for actors to do, because actors make great directors, because who spends more time on a set understanding all the details of what goes into making this than the actor. And if the actor has a vision beyond their own role or character, and they have a vision, which Tom always did, have a vision for the big picture, they can make very fine directors and producers. And, our partnership was always working in concert together for the better of the film. I believe in collaboration. Film is not by committee, that's dangerous, but it is collaborative, and you have to be collaborative. Art is collaborative. Business is collaborative as well.
I mean, there are very few movie stars outside of the US who can actually get a film greenlit, if you like. I mean, Hal, talk about putting together an independent film, an English language film. You're always looking to get a US actor, aren't you, to unlock the funds?
Well, yeah, it's a whole puzzle that you have to put together when you put together the financing for an independent film. It's a combination of all of the elements, the director, the actors, and then the budget level of the film. In recent years, I think we mentioned on the panel yesterday, independent films, the budgets have actually come down from what they were a few years ago. And I think that's a combination of what Paula said, technology, bringing down the cost of films, and the fact that talent is working for less in these independent films. There are fewer studio movies being made. They're focusing on the big tentpole films, which means that there are a lot of actors and directors out of work. And David will not like this, but actors and actors' agents are now working and willing to work for much less on these independent films. And you have to look at putting together the right combination of actors and director and the genre of the project at the right budget to meet what the international and worldwide value of that film is. And there are certain actors that generate certain values in different territories around the world. So it's always a puzzle, piecing all the pieces together and looking at what the value of that actor is in Germany and France and Italy and Russia. And, for instance, in Russia, 5 or 10 years ago, we would sell the rights to Russia on an American independent film, and we were lucky if we would get $25,000, $50,000. Today, that number is sometimes $500,000 or $1 million. The value of the territory is going up, and that's happening in some territories around the world, and in some territories it's going down. For instance, in Spain, with all the problems there, the value of Spain used to be 6 or 7% of the budget. Today, you're lucky if you get 2 or 3% of the budget. So it's all of those things you have to take into account when you're putting an independent film together.
David, I mean, I'm interested in that, in the creation of these local stars. I mean, if you look at, for example, the Spanish stars, Antonio Banderas, Penelope Cruz, Javier Bardem to some extent, very accomplished actors, stars in their own territory, but they only became global stars when they went to Hollywood and made American films. Do you think that the situation with Russian actors is that they can get films financed only after they've been to Hollywood?
I think Hollywood's a misnomer. After they can get films financed once their movies appeal to a global audience, is the answer. But one of the things that's interesting to me, and Elena brought up a very good point, which is the methodology of the system in Russia. One of the things that's obvious to me, and I think it's an exciting time because this is going to be a moment of disruption in this methodology, is, as I understand it, there's this very wonderful, beautiful tradition of theater in Russia where these actors are groomed to perform in theater, and that is their craft. What I'd like to see happen is a star system built in Russia, where suddenly we create a moment for a true international Russian celebrity. That hasn't happened to my knowledge. I would love to see that happen, because suddenly you'll see the rest of the world follow suit. Every luxury brand wants a position in Russia. If an international celebrity that comes from Russia is put in front of them, they're going to want to be in business with that celebrity. And so I think it behooves the people in this room to help create that system. And the way that system is created is by nurturing and supporting an actor's career and creating a more global platform for that actor. And it's not thinking about the theater. The British have a similar legacy where their actors are trained in the theater, but they've become bolder. I think the James Bond franchise created that first moment for the British cinema to really become a global phenomenon. I'd love to see that happen for Russia.
Paula, let's talk about television for a moment. certainly from the rest of the world's point of view, American television has become sensational, better than it's ever been. We're watching a lot of Hollywood movie actors segging into television very seamlessly. From your point of view, in the heart of Los Angeles, how does television fit into the equation?
Very strongly. Television is, in some circles, being said that it is actually better quality than film, that there's actually more opportunities for stories, for talent to work. Work in films, work in mainstream studio films is more limited today, which is why, as Hal was saying, actors, as you know, actors are working in all areas. I think we're in the process of creating a tradition not dissimilar from the UK or Russia, where actors are working between all mediums. For example, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm producing a Broadway show, a revival of a play called The Heiress with a film cast. Jessica Chastain, who just starred in The Help and Tree of Life and a number of other films. David Strathairn, who was in Good Night and Good Luck, and a UK actor named Dan Stevens, who's the lead on Downton Abbey. So we've put together an international cast somewhat, and movie and television actors to do theater. And that same actor will go back, do stage, do a film, and do television. So I think television is a great opportunity. I'm hearing this, I haven't seen it. Everybody Loves Raymond is doing a Russian version. They've done and it's fascinating how television is the inspiration for many big blockbuster movies. I made one of them. Television is the inspiration for finding talent, for finding great writers. Look at a writer like Aaron Sorkin. You all know who Aaron Sorkin is. Aaron Sorkin started in the theater. He wrote a play called A Few Good Men. Rob Reiner, who's an actor and director, came in, saw this, tailored it, worked with him, turned it into a film starring Tom Cruise, Kevin Bacon, Demi Moore, Jack Nicholson, classic film. Then Aaron Sorkin has gone on to do HBO and films, The Social Network. So I think television is a beginning, and people come back to it. I just made something for Lifetime called Five, where we had 5 actresses, direct 5 short episodes. We had Alicia Keys, Demi Moore, we had Jennifer Aniston, who was directing, and then 2 film directors. So there's great opportunities. I think talent is reaching out beyond, in our country, certainly, which I think you've done here, for many, many years, beyond just the isolation of film.
10 years ago, there was a snobbery, wasn't there, about film talent working
absolutely.
in television?
If a film actor, conceptually 10 years ago, and more, a film actor would stick with film. It was a very rigid line that you walked if you were a film actor, and you wouldn't do television, you wouldn't do commercials, you would never think of seeing a great actress like a Cate Blanchett advertising cosmetics, or somebody, who is it, Leonardo DiCaprio, watches, or, I mean, the only commercials you might do something in Japan that hope nobody would see. But with the internet, everybody sees everything all the time. We have instantaneous access to all information, visually, and so now anything goes, and that's great, because that's where we get into also branding, which movies are brands. So yes, there are many opportunities. Actors wouldn't do, if they were movie actors, television, and they wouldn't do stage because it was perceived if they were doing stage, their career was over. That's how you go out to pasture to do stage. And now, that's all completely changed.
Yeah, and I think that I agree completely with Paula. That taboo has been completely broken, and I think part of that has to do with technology again. I think with video on demand, it's the way that people will see films and see content going forward. The theaters will be for big tentpole films, the IMAX films, and the big blockbusters. 3D films. I think more content will be seen by more eyes and people around the world by video on demand, and I think people are realizing that, and more content will be produced this way, and actors want to be seen and want more exposure, and I think by doing this, they get that.
What about technology, and how has the internet, how is it going to change the film business, do you think, over the next few years? It's a global business. Movies are opening in Russia before, American movies are opening in Russia even before America, partly because of piracy, but also because there's a day-and-date issue going forward with all the Hollywood tentpole films. So, what perspectives do you have on film production, on film distribution in the future?
Well, I think, of course, the fact that you could instantaneously access any point of the planet through your computer or through your television screen will obviously change the distribution system, because you will have somehow a central distribution that you will be able to access, and you can then see the same film in Russia and in the United States and in England and in China. Mm. So that, I think, is a huge impact. You no longer need to bring the physical print or whatever to the destination, but now the spectator can access the content, which is I think the most significant change in this. How that will work, I guess there will be the necessity of certain additional technologies, so that if people want to see a dubbed film, because Paula was talking earlier about the language, but there is, of course, certainly in Europe and even in Japan, there are the local versions. People dub, and all of a sudden Tom Cruise is speaking Italian or French or Spanish or Japanese. So for the instantaneous access to that, you'll need to be able to dial X for French, dial Y for Spanish, and so forth, and then you'll be able to see the film instantly on your 3D screen, and it's all rather mind-boggling, of course.
But there are financial implications, Hal, no? Because, if we start crunching down the windows, if we start taking away territorial rights, this is how the film business is financed.
Well, yeah, it could open up opportunities also with a broader audience. And we're seeing the phenomenon also now where premieres of Hollywood films are happening in countries outside of the United States. And that generates a buzz for a film. I forget the film recently, just the last few months, a film premiered in Europe, and they used the promotional activity in the States by saying it was the #1 film in some territory in Europe. You should come and see it here. And so it's a whole new thing that the studios and independents are testing it out and trying to see how this new world works in terms of technology. Mm. I don't think anyone really knows. I think everyone's trying to figure out the new model.
I think that film you mentioned was the Disney disaster, and it didn't really help.
Oh no, John Carter.
Just to comment on that night watch, day watch, I think that's a perfect example of a wonderful Russian story that wasn't told in a manner that was understandable to the global audiences.
What do you mean, Elena?
I mean, we have to be honest that the foreign films just don't play in the United States, period, whether they're Russian or otherwise, in a significant way. But the day watch, I actually took my husband and I said, it's a great story, I read the book, we need to see it. And we went to see it and he said, I don't understand anything.
So it's storytelling.
Right, and it was a great story.
Different storytelling cultures.
I'll switch into Russian.
Yeah.
Я хочу сказать несколько слов о деловых аспектах работы с западными партнерами. Потому что Творческие вопросы, конечно, это очень хорошо, и я думаю, в этой аудитории очень много творческих людей, которые в творческих вопросах глубоко разбираются. Но я хотела бы буквально несколько слов сказать о том, как структурировать и оформлять деловые отношения в работе с западными партнерами. Моя первая мысль заключается в том, что так называемый Голливуд очень устоявшаяся индустрия, или, как мы говорим, mature industry. И поэтому все механизмы уже как бы выработаны. И на каждый случай жизни есть решение. И эти механизмы всем, кто работает в индустрии в Соединенных Штатах, понятны, известны, и по ним ведутся переговоры. И вот знание того, как структурируется сделка, как она финансируется, как оформляются взаимоотношения с актерами, режиссерами, сценаристами, как оформляются взаимоотношения с финансовыми партнерами, как оформляются отношения с дистрибьюторами. Все эти аспекты очень важны. И я должна вам признаться, что очень часто в работе с моими российскими клиентами или просто знакомыми я слышу фразу: да, ну мы подписали стандартный голливудский контракт. И все мои коллеги, которые сидят здесь за столом, могут вам сказать: такой вещи нет. Стандартного голливудского контракта не существует. По каждому пункту адвокаты обеих сторон ведут ожесточенные переговоры. Эти вопросы нуждаются во внимании. Хал и я работали над фильмом в свое время, который был профинансирован из России, который был произведен на английском языке с участием Джоэла Силвера компании. И это для меня был очень интересный опыт работы с российскими финансистами, российскими сценаристами, американскими продюсерами, американскими финансистами и агентами. И у меня ушло, наверное, ну, скажем, месяца 2, пока мои российские партнеры выработали уровень доверия и понимания к своим партнерам и представителям, который позволил нам работать более эффективно. В начале этой деятельности мы все столкнулись с тем, что российские партнеры подозревали, что их хотят обмануть. И не слушали наших советов. Вот эта опасность всегда существует. Я не хочу сказать, что нет нечестных людей на Западе. И, наверное, есть люди, которые действительно хотят обмануть. Но это далеко не обязательно.
Sorry, we're just finishing up the translation.
Wow, a lot to think about.
So it's a question of trust.
It is a question of trust, but I think it's vital what you're doing, the business, because we have the business, the technological, and the art, which are the three lines of the triangle, and those are the areas that comprise our business, and it's balancing, it's keeping those three elements in balance, and finding the business bridge. The issues, I think, though, that are vital, that are confronting us in the States, in the United States, is piracy. That is one of the biggest issues that is confronting us today. I've heard figures as high as $6 billion a year are lost to the film industry because of piracy. And that's one of the big things that is being taken on, one of the big issues that the MPAA is taking on, and that the world needs to take on together as we become more and more this international business, because it affects all of us. And the other thing is copyright issues, ownership issues that go on the internet. Who owns images? Who owns a product? When is something plagiarized? When is something, what do you own? From an actor's standpoint, does an actor own his own image when they are hired by a studio playing a role? Do they own that image in perpetuity? These are the kind of questions that the internet has provided. Finally, distribution, methods of distribution. Where will that be in the next few years? Studios, theater owners in the States are nervous because the attendance isn't really increasing significantly enough in the movie-going audience. When you look at foreign films, as we call them in the States, one of the reasons that the attendance is declining is a lot of those films are going out over Netflix or being distributed, going directly to some kind of cable or Netflix. And that's a source of revenue. So these are all the problems confronting us, and this is where the business bridge is really vital right now.
I also want us to have a reality check on the Hollywood industry, which essentially has been in crisis for the last few years. I mean, we talked about piracy, but there's been a confluence of events like the declining appetite for DVD, the reduction in TV purchasing of films. We talked about, actors taking cut rates. I mean, thousands of people have lost their jobs in the Hollywood studio system. This is very tough times, isn't it, in Los Angeles?
Who wants to take this one?
I'll happily take it. I have an opposing view to this theory. I think we're at a moment of transition. And I think digital disruption is good. I think digital disruption is really exciting. I think there are people in this audience that have iPads and iPhones and may have even been watching a movie while we've been talking. I think that's exciting. I think that creates an opportunity for us to continue to deliver and distribute our work in a different manner. There's a saying that a screen is a screen is a screen. And the truth is, that's true. I think that we are now consuming entertainment in a variety of different ways. We're able to reap rewards for repurposing of material in a more entrepreneurial manner. What brings a recent example of that is the reissuing of Titanic in China. I think that is an extraordinary moment. Fox reissued Titanic in 3D and made hundreds of millions of dollars in China. That is new. Titanic was seen in a limited manner in China when it was originally released. It had a minor altercation in its release and was released in 3D, which is a major alteration, in that it was re-exhibited and created a new revenue stream for Fox. That is exciting. That is different. It is a new way of showing a product, and I think is where we're all going to be trying to solve this issue.
But to continue the doom argument for a second.
You can be doom and I'll be positive.
Okay. Is there an argument that the studios had become complacent in their business dealings, that they were too fat, too flabby?
Yeah, well, that I agree with.
Too slow?
I think that the internet has created a moment for them to re-examine their own business. And the studios have become essentially marketing and distribution entities and not production entities. But that's okay because there are people like Hal Sadoff who've solved that. Hal has been able to go and find production financing to bring finished movies to the studios, and so they aren't necessarily dependent to finance those movies.
What the studios have, which nobody else in the world has, is these incredible catalogues of films, isn't it, that they can continue to exploit and through multiple media for the rest of in perpetuity. But it's an industrial system that's unique. I mean, possibly in India, the Bollywood system is building. It has its own star system and has its own history. But we can't ever pretend that any other country can ape Hollywood in that sort of infrastructure.
I actually don't know. I think that we're going to wake up one day and see a Chinese company or an Indian company buy a movie studio, or maybe several. It'd be wonderful to see a Russian company do that as well. Because I think what they're realizing is that there is incredible value in these libraries. I mean, the studios, to argue your doom scenario, the studios are reporting record profits. And those profits are coming from the television side and the library side. What they're realizing is that they're repurposing their libraries in a more robust manner because of all these new technologies.
What about the film side? We have seen the emergence of these kind of the sequel issue and the repurposing of comic books. In creative terms, it seems like a sort of a low point in Hollywood history.
In a creative way? That speaks to Paula's argument.
Doom again here.
Well, I think Paula brought up the greatest sort of synthesis of what makes a good movie, and that's story. You know, I think we're all transported when we see a great story. And that's why we need young people and excited, creative people to rejuvenate us.
There is a way of which the story is told, because the way, for example, a Russian writer will tell a story will not necessarily be received by an American audience. You need to adapt a little bit the perception. The screenwriters in Russia are very different from the screenwriters in America.
That's an education issue as well, and I think that and I'd love to hear the panel this afternoon about education. The art of screenwriting is a very specific process to write in a 3-act structure, to create an inciting incident. These are things that the global audience is now used to. I would like to see Russian screenwriters do the same thing so that we don't have to see more of what you're saying is that dissonance between Russian storytelling and global storytelling.
I also have a comment on the subject of studio and non-studio films. I mean, from my observation, studio films, you know, the big event films will continue to exist. They're extremely successful all over the world. There may be fewer of them that will be released every year or produced by the studios, but I think they will always be there. But I think what we're seeing now is the emergence of this independently financed, produced movies in what I would say like a sweet spot of $12, $15, $20 million, which are co-financed through various European schemes. And that's what opens enormous opportunities for people sitting here in this room, because there is some financing available in Russia, and together with that financing available in Russia, with financing available in Europe, with the expertise that experienced producers and filmmakers from the United States could bring into the picture, there are enormous opportunities for making really excellent movies, some of which may actually be a runaway success, like we all know King's Speech or Black Swan, which made enormous amounts of money, produced for, $12 million budgets.
Going back, a very good point, by the way, that right now the film business seems to be, certainly in Hollywood style, big tent poles or the small, interesting, independent world, which is having a renaissance. What's missing, and the studios used to do that in the 90s when I was making movies there, what's missing is the middle. Studios, a movie for $35 million won't get made at a studio.
Why is that, Paula?
Because this goes to another problem that we have, which is the advertising costs. What we call prints and ads, P&A cost, is exorbitant. So
the cost of releasing the film,
the cost to release the film, to advertise the film, to buy television advertising, which is the most right now perceived, although what's happening with the internet is it's changing, and that is bringing the cost down. But for example, if you have a $35 million budgeted movie that's not a franchise, that's not a brand, so that means you have to put extra marketing dollars, and if it's an adult film, if it's a drama, and it doesn't have a concept or a handle or a mega movie star or something that you can grab onto and hold onto, with exceptions, you could spend $40 million marketing your film, advertising your film. So now you have $75 million that you have to get back just to break even. And if your film doesn't travel internationally, you're going to have a very hard time because your DVD market has shrunk, because you're not going to have as many opportunities. So that's why the studios, in a way, have relegated, or I don't know if relegated is the right, but have said we're not going to be in that business. It's to abandon that business. But I do want to say something about the international that you had mentioned. We do have two studios owned by international companies. Japan is Sony,
Yeah.
and in Australia, Fox is owned by an Australian company. And the AMC cinemas were just bought by a Chinese company. So I think that we're seeing the influx of money from other countries, and it certainly opens the doors for Russia to come in and make investments into our domestic film business.
There was a Russian investor who purchased a large music company just recently. So the studio is next.
And we've got half an
They'll
hour
turn
left.
it into a studio.
Let's have some questions from the floor for our panelists.
My opinion, somebody...
Sorry, 1 second, wait for the mic.
My opinion as someone who's working both sides, Russia and Hollywood, having a strong panel like yourself representing Hollywood here, I think so much more of the focus needs to be on what needs to be arranged to set up bringing Hollywood films to shoot in Russia as co-productions, much more so than trying to bring Russians to make films in Hollywood. Because first of all, which then starts with what Hal and I have discussed, which is taking advantage of the tax treaties and getting the government to create more subsidies and that type of thing. Because it's going to be much more educational having our filmmakers come here and integrating with the Russian filmmakers. But this is going to start by taking advantage of the treaties, and there's one on the books that's a Russian-Canadian co-production that everyone knows is there, but I haven't seen anyone be able to use yet. And just one suggestion and opinion of mine is having a strong group like you here. There's only two people I know in this country that can really push something like that, and that's Nikita Mikhalkov or Fedor Bondarchuk. And while you're here, anything you can do to focus on, getting them, educating them to go to the government and push government to try to make this treaty kick in and to try to get a 20-30% tax credit and subsidies will only help merge the Russian market with Hollywood a lot quicker than all the Russians starting to invest in Hollywood films that are picking the wrong producing partners, that are finding the wrong distributors to sell their films, and unfortunately not having a lot of success.
There are two things. You were mentioning the Canadian-Russian treaty. Of course, there is a European Convention, which includes England, and through England you can sort of open the Anglo-Saxon world. Secondly, I don't completely agree that the only kind of cooperation should be Hollywood films coming here. I mean, as Paula was very eloquently saying earlier, if you look at the Mission Impossible, when they decided to make the movie, they said, well, can we go around the world? Can we get participants from around the world? And I think it's that kind of state of mind that needs to be brought to Russia to open the thing. I mean, there are films that you can the concept can come from here, some of the characters can come from here, but then you've got the world should be their oyster, rather than doing it all here.
And I agree with you completely on that. The problem is the problem with most Russians who want to make movies in the U.S. or Russians who are financing U.S. films, they're getting involved initially with the wrong people to make those films. And those people, very few independent film distributors, independent filmmakers in Hollywood, producers, really understand distribution. So the problem is maybe they're finding a great producing partner. Maybe they're getting a couple, fairly good named stars. But then when it comes to finding the distribution, they're not selecting a good distributor. They're not getting half their investment back, as Hal probably knows this, better than anyone, and has probably seen it more than anyone. So that's the problem. There's the negative effect of all these first Russians who have started investing in Hollywood films and aren't getting returns because they're selecting the wrong producing partners. Hal, correct me if you know if you think I'm wrong there. And
we'll distribute our business cards after the panel.
Well, I think you're right. People have to choose the right people to be in business with. I think that's in any business in any country around the world. You know, I think people in Hollywood, it's very hard to really know what they really have done because their resumes can say they worked on a project, but you don't know in what capacity. And I think unless you're an industry insider, it's very hard to know the true reputations of people and how much they've really done on certain projects. So my advice is to definitely be in business with industry insiders that could give you the right advice before people start either co-producing or co-financing with anyone. And this goes for any country around the world.
I just like to, any business that you decide you're going into, any business, rule number one is to research it and become an expert in that field. And it is incumbent upon anyone who decides that they want to engage with an industry, particularly one that's not local in their own country, is to research it very, very extensively before you get involved. So that when you do, and there are no absolutes or guarantees about anything, but you can, and particularly now this is where the internet, the ubiquity of the internet and information, which a lot of it's wrong, but a lot of it isn't, so you have to have an ability to decipher, but you can start to put together an analysis and an assessment of what is the right, who are the right people to be in business with, what are the right situations to engage in, particularly when you're going to invest your money. You don't do it lightly, you do it very, very cautiously and carefully. And I think that's the key. And again, there are no absolutes in terms of...
You know, to touch on one more issue that David had mentioned, and that is, you know, there are a number of Russian stars or actors who are speaking great English, starting to work in Hollywood, as we all know, such as Vladimir Mashkov, everybody knows, Oleg Tiktarov. But their biggest complaint and the biggest problem for them is that in the majority of movies, Russians are stereotyped as the bad guy. So they're continually getting the roles as the bad guy. I think you just had Vladimir Mashkov in the last Mission Impossible.
Paula didn't produce that movie.
Okay, well, anyway, the last Mission Impossible, Vladimir Mashkov was the bad guy, if I remember correctly. Right? No, he wasn't.
He was a good guy.
He was a good guy in it.
Well, you see.
Really? Well, that's good. Okay, that's a change because, yeah, in the Quickie, he was the mafia guy, and...
Yeah. If I can answer... But if I can answer that question, and one of the things I really stress here is it's up to the Russian film community to create these opportunities for their talent. One of the first questions I asked when I arrived here is, well, I'll change the story. You know, in America, when you say who's the most famous American, some people say Johnny Depp, some people say Brad Pitt, some people say Tom Cruise. When you say who's the most famous Russian, they say Vladimir Putin. And so I think it's up to the Russian film community to create these stars in their own image. That's the issue, in their own image, what they want Russian stars to portray. We, Hollywood people, have created American movie stars in the image that we wanted them to be portrayed. And I think it's now the time for the Russian film community to create their own stars.
Just to comment on that, I made a movie a number of years ago called Vanilla Sky. And that was based on a Spanish film called Abre los ojos, Open Your Eyes. And I saw this film and thought it would make a terrific adaptation. It was in Spanish, so we adapted it. Cameron Crowe came in, wrote it, and directed it. And Tom played the lead. We brought in a number of, wonderful cast, but when it came to casting the female, the young woman who played the lead in the Spanish film was fantastic, spoke English, had done a number of English-speaking films, so we cast her in that role. Her name was Penelope Cruz. So she played the lead in both films. And I think there are a number of films that get remade from one language to another, and there's an opportunity there for actors and actresses under the right conditions to be able to make that transition as well.
Just to one of your earlier points, I want to establish that this panel does call for the Russian government to explore a tax incentive to lure foreign production here.
Very much so. That would be a beginning in terms of how do you bring production here.
And the copyright reform.
More questions?
Actually, I just, one word. Mike and I both participated in a panel on piracy issues at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, where the issues of piracy in Russia have been explored in great depth by both of us and others. Yeah. And we actually invite everyone to, I think everything is on the internet, and we invite everyone to take a look at that discussion. But the reform of the copyright laws in Russia is due.
Question over here.
Добрый день. У меня, наверное, вопрос к Давиду. Если я правильно понимаю, вы работаете в ICM. Вернее, это два вопроса. Первый, как создавать российских звезд, если они плохо говорят по-английски? Может быть, у вас есть какие-то идеи? Я спрашиваю абсолютно серьезно. А второй вопрос. Честно говоря, я не боюсь никого в Голливуде так, как агентов. Потому что если, например, ты хочешь создать фильм все-таки с кем-то из США, то можно встретиться практически с кем угодно из студий, и крупные студии. Я в первый раз в Голливуде, например, не имела сложностей. Но когда ты хочешь работать с агентом, потому что понятно, что и режиссеры, и звезды, это в первую очередь необходимо установить связь с агентами, то мой пример, я просто чуть-чуть поясню вопрос. 3 месяца назад я отправила порядка 15 писем, и из Европы мне ответили, и даже Кустурица лично написал, а из американских агентств я не получила ни одного ответа, хотя это было абсолютно нормальное, вполне хорошо составленное письмо с вопросом, можно ли вступить в контакт.
I'm also afraid of agents, but I'll let David take that one.
Firstly, I'd like to apologize to you on behalf of all of my colleagues. Let me first address the first part of your question, and we'll get to the second part. The first part, which is how do you create a Russian star? And why? I think the way to look at that argument is to say, look at the other territories. Look at France. They created Gerard Depardieu. They created Jean Dujardin. Jean Dujardin just got cast in Martin Scorsese's new film. Look at Italy, they created Roberto Benigni. Look at Spain, they have Penelope Cruz and Antonio Banderas. There's a long history of actors crossing over from their own local language films and making it in Hollywood. And one of the reasons they do that is because they capture our imagination. We fell in love with Roberto Benigni, we fell in love with Gerard Depardieu. There is an incredible connection with these actors. We haven't yet had the opportunity to do that with a Russian actor. And I'm welcoming that, I'm encouraging that. I think that the internet will create an era of celebrity in Russia that hasn't been experienced yet, and that will be a moment for Russia as well. And as far as how does one interface, well, some of the people I just mentioned don't speak English. Roberto Benigni does not speak English well. Jean Dujardin does not speak English well. These are actors who captured our imagination because of their performances. Language is one part of the performance, but the other part of the performance is their ability to emote and capture the role. And I think that what I encourage the Russian actors to do is to invent those characters so that we can fall in love with them and want to bring them to Hollywood. To speak to your second part of your question is how to interface with agents. It's really a relationship business. And coming to the Moscow Business Square is a wonderful way to do that. You're going to meet people that work in Hollywood and create a dialogue and a relationship with them. You're going to have that advantage. And so to promote that and this event and other events like it are going to create opportunities for you to interact with Hollywood agents. They're not all bad, I promise.
Я тогда на вас рассчитываю.
I'm sorry?
Два моих письма было отправлено в ICM, и вы, насколько я понимаю, оттуда, тогда я буду рассчитывать на связь с вами. Посмотрим на пример.
Я отвечу за Дэвида. ICM – это очень большая организация. Вы послали письмо какому-то конкретному человеку или на деревню дедушки?
Ну, я послала в одном случае это на деревню дедушки, потому что конкретного не нашли, но конкретного человека, которому я послала по конкретному режиссеру, я могу назвать. Просто мне кажется, что это не очень сейчас...
Нет, не нужно называть, но весь вопрос, этот конкретный человек занимается именно вопросами международного кино или нет?
Да. Это именно те, более того, мы туда звонили, и я пыталась и по телефону договориться, мне сказали еще раз отправить и так далее. Поверьте, я достаточно опытный во взаимодействии человек, чтобы использовать все возможности. Кроме того, на некоторых мероприятиях, скажем, в Каннах, я к представителям агентств подходила лично.
I would love to continue this conversation with you privately, but I think that what you're speaking to is a communication between cultures. The Hollywood ecosystem is built on relationships. It's based on referrals. There are some wonderful people in Russia who have incredible dialogue with people in Hollywood. People like Elena Baranova, who's here today, or Bob Van Runkel, who's here today. This Elena. There are a lot of people in Russia that can help serve as that conduit. And I would encourage you to create those relationships, because the purpose of the Moscow Business Square is to create this dialogue. And so what you're really speaking to is why this is a good event.
I think also, as far as I know, there is no agency culture here in Russia. And it's not only because my friend David is here to pay a compliment, but a good agent, the agents didn't respond to you okay, but you have good agents and you have agents that take a career of someone. And David is a perfect example, who took actors that were at the bottom, that were no longer working, and he made them back into stars. So the role of an agent is a very important one, and probably there needs to be that agent culture introduced, hopefully not to the extremity that it is in Hollywood, but in the right level, which helps actors find themselves and create a career.
I have a confession to make. I was an actress, and I had a very difficult time with agents. So I became an agent.
More questions? Sir, madam, sorry.
Я хотела бы спросить, вот мы слышим очень много относительно того, что в России не так, там у нас не хватает агентов, у нас чего-то еще, и из положительного я услышала, что в России есть деньги, на которые снимается кино. А можете вы еще что-то с вашего как бы западного опыта сказать, а в России еще в кинобизнесе есть что-то положительное, как бы, вот какие-то достижения за 20 лет, допустим, существования новой России были достигнуты? Или мы также продолжаем, по вашему мнению, быть где-то там на задворках всей индустрии? Спасибо.
I don't think people were talking in negative terms about the fact that Russia doesn't have an agency system. I just think we were talking about what the US does have. Isn't that true?
If I could speak to the agency question, because I think it's an important issue, because one of my ideas is to help Russia create a star system. The way that is done is through an agency system. I'm not aware of that system existing already in Russia. It would be very interesting to help create that system so that there will be more dialogue between the agencies, because as Paula knows, Penelope Cruz was referred to her Hollywood agent by her Spanish agent. And so there is that dialogue between international agencies. And so if we can encourage that system to be created, I think we'll have less of the problem that we're discussing.
I think what the great thing about the UK system also is that actors who achieve fame in the US often come back and help British films get made. The Kate Winslets of this world, the Ewan McGregors. So it's beneficial both for the local industry and for the US industry.
I'd like to mention that Superman is played by a British actor, and Batman is played by a British actor, and Spider-Man is played by a British actor. So we're living in a world where it doesn't really matter where you come from.
But as to your question about the achievements of the last 20 years, obviously some great filmmakers have come out of Russia in the last 20 years and some great films. So I don't think that's in question. More questions? We've got 10 minutes left, so a couple more questions. Sir.
I think it's something from the top. I think it's a great sign that we have such a beautiful bunch of top Hollywood people here today, which never happened before. We have top producers, top agents, top entertainment lawyers. I think it's a very positive and very good for both industries, and I hope that we're building industry here, not just something not significant. And when David mentioned $1 billion gross office in Russian theaters, it's I think it's like 75% belongs to US. I mean, this money will come back. But in any way, I'd like to thank Film Fund and Lena Romanova and Sergei Tolstikov for creating this great event, and it will be, I'm pretty sure it will be positive for both sides. Thank you very much.
Well, that's a good note on which to wrap up, I think. So I'd like to thank all our panelists for their insight and look forward to our next panel, which will be an in-depth conversation with Rick Nocita and Leslie Dart. So stick around. Yes.